This story takes place during my senior year in San Antonio, Texas, back when the COVID-19 pandemic first began. Most things were shut down, including my school, but my friends and I weren't the types to stay cooped up inside. Instead, we saw this as a perfect opportunity to explore haunted sites, eerie parks, or anywhere that gave us a thrill. I'd always loved urban exploration, especially places rumored to be haunted. And to this day, I'm not one to get scared easily. One night, I managed to convince a girl named Clarissa, whom I'd recently started dating, to come along on one of these nighttime adventures. I thought it would be fun to take her to a local wooded park, optionable, known to have a dark history. Not too long ago, a woman was brutally murdered there, and in 2021, a boy was shot while exploring the woods. Knowing these stories only added to the excitement. I promised Clarissa it'd be safe, and after some hesitation, she agreed to come along. We arrived at the park around 3 a.m. The trees were so dense that even the moonlight barely filtered through, casting the entire area in an almost complete darkness. Clarissa and I kept our flashlights off to adjust our eyes to the darkness and avoid attracting attention. Everything was dead silent, a little too quiet, in fact, which only added to the eeriness. I told her about a trail that would take us back to my truck if we followed it in a loop. She agreed, and we began our way through the dense, dark path. But just a few minutes down this trail, a sound stopped us in our tracks, a soft, eerie flute playing from somewhere in the distance. The melody was haunting, and it seemed almost too perfect, too deliberate, as if someone was performing for an unseen audience. We exchanged looks, both confused and more than a little creeped out. I wasn't scared yet, but I could feel Clarissa starting to tremble beside me. I kept trying to pinpoint the source of the sound, but it seemed to echo from all directions, bouncing off the trees. Clarissa began muttering prayers under her breath, pleading for safety. That's when I realized just how terrified she was. I told her we should start running, and we sprinted down the trail, hoping to get away from the sound, but the flute music followed us, growing louder, closer, as if it was chasing us through the woods. We didn't stop running, but then, out of nowhere, we heard a loud rustling in the bushes right in front of us. I froze, trying to spot whatever it was that had dashed across our path, but all I felt was a gust of air, something big and silent moving past us without a trace. We had two choices: head back into the main trail or take the off-road path where we'd just heard that mysterious creature dash. I took Clarissa's hand and whispered that we should go back the way we came, hoping the main trail would be safer. We ran faster, not looking back, adrenaline pushing us until we reached my truck. Once inside, I locked the doors and sped out of there as fast as I could. The next day, I looked up similar stories online to see if anyone else had experienced the strange flute sounds. I found stories of people encountering ghosts, strange noises, or even cult gatherings, but I couldn't find anything about a haunting flute melody in the middle of the night. To this day, I have no explanation for what happened that night, and I've never gone back to those woods after dark. And here our first story ends. Okay then, before we continue to our story, like the video and hit that subscribe button so I can confirm you are a brave person. Now let's go back to the story. This story happened about a year ago on a desolate stretch of highway between two small towns in Pennsylvania. I'd been driving alone, coming back from a late family gathering. It was close to midnight, and I had miles to go, with nothing but dark fields and occasional clusters of trees to break the endless road. No cars, no lights, just a feeling that the world had fallen asleep, leaving me alone with my thoughts. About halfway through the drive, my mind started playing tricks on me. I was getting sleepy and kept telling myself to stay awake, focusing on the lines on the road. Then, out of nowhere, I saw a figure standing on the side of the road ahead, barely visible under the dim glow of my headlights. As I got closer, I realized it was a woman, dressed in what looked like an old-fashioned white gown, like something you'd see in period dramas or a horror movie. I slowed down, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. She stood still, facing away from the road, her long hair falling down her back. My heart raced, and I debated whether to stop and check on her or just keep driving. Before I could decide, she started walking slowly, with no hurry, drifting almost, as if she wasn't quite touching the ground. She turned and crossed the road right in front of me, forcing me to come to a complete stop. I looked directly at her face, and that's when the full chill of the situation hit me. Her face was blank, almost expressionless, but her eyes were wide open, staring into the distance, as though she was looking at something or someone far beyond me. She paused for a moment, still looking in the distance, then turned her gaze directly at me. Every hair on my body stood on end. There was something not right, something that felt colder than just the night air. Then, as suddenly as she'd appeared, she turned and began walking off the road, disappearing back into the darkness. I didn't wait to see where she went. My foot hit the gas, and I sped down the road, heart pounding, constantly checking my rearview mirror to see if she was following me. But the road stayed empty, as if nothing unusual had happened. I kept thinking, maybe it was just my imagination, maybe I was just overtired. But when I finally pulled into my driveway, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd come face to face with someone who wasn't supposed to be there. The next day, I asked around, mentioning the strange woman to a few locals. One of them, an older man, nodded knowingly and said that there'd been stories of a woman in white haunting that stretch of road for years. She'd supposedly been killed in a car accident there decades ago, and some say she's still waiting, trying to get back home. I don't drive that road at night anymore. I take the longer way home, even if it adds an hour. That experience left me rattled, and I have no intention of meeting that figure on the midnight road again. And here our story ends. Okay then, before we continue to our story, like the video and hit that subscribe button, cause now I know you are a good person. So let's start our new story. This one happened a few years ago when I was driving cross-country on a solo trip. I just graduated from college and was doing what any recent graduate would do, taking a road trip to clear my head before settling into my career. I was traveling through rural Texas, miles away from any major cities, when my gas light flashed on, and I realized I hadn't seen a gas station in ages. Around midnight, I finally came across a dimly lit gas station with a neon sign flickering, and I decided to pull in. The station looked abandoned at first glance, but the lights were on, so I figured it was still in business. I needed fuel, and there was no other station in sight, so I pulled up to the pump. As I got out of the car, I noticed how quiet everything seemed. There wasn't a single other car around, and the eerie hum of the neon sign was the only sound filling the air. I walked inside the small convenience store, which was equally deserted. The flickering fluorescent lights overhead gave the entire place an unsettling vibe. Then, behind the counter, I noticed the clerk. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, disheveled, unshaven, and his eyes bloodshot. I approached him with my card, trying to ignore the unease settling in my stomach. As he rang up my gas, he looked me up and down and said something I'll never forget. You're lucky you came when you did. It's getting bad out there. I didn't respond, and he continued with a cryptic warning. Last guy who pulled up here, he didn't make it. At this point, I couldn't help but feel the hairs on my neck stand up. The man behind the counter didn't seem like he was joking, but I didn't want to overreact, so I just nodded and took my receipt, trying to ignore the strange feeling growing inside of me. As I walked back to my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I looked around the gas station again, and that's when I saw it. On the opposite side of the station, a black car was parked, its engine running but with no driver in sight. The windows were tinted so darkly that I couldn't see inside. My heart raced as I got into my car, quickly starting the engine. I was about to drive off when the clerk suddenly appeared at the door, shouting something I couldn't quite make out. Before I could hear him, I slammed my foot on the gas and peeled out of there as fast as I could. To this day, I still don't know what happened that night. When I told my friends about it, they looked at me like I was overreacting. But I can't shake the thought that maybe I narrowly avoided something sinister. I never did find out who the last guy was, but I swear, the feeling I had that night was far from normal. And here Oral 3 Stories ends. I hope you enjoyed the video. Saying for the last time, like the video and subscribe our channel for more videos with interesting true stories. Thank you and have a good day tomorrow.